So AI assisted editors. There's so many in the market. Which one should you use? Tim, I know you've used quite a few. I've also tested a bunch. We wanted to record this podcast to try to give you, the listener, some idea of which one you should be using based on your needs and based on your ambition and where you might face some limitations and the key differences between them. The biggest differences between these editors are going to be whether they're cloud-based or local-based. After that, they have a bunch of other differences, and we'll get into each one of those. Lovable, Bolt, Replit, Cursor, Cline, and Windsurf. I think those are probably the most popular and kind of fall into a similar category. So Tim, I know you use quite a few, so maybe we'll start with just a little bit of your background before we get into reviewing and how they're different, kind of which ones you've used, and from your perspective, how have they been different in terms of your journey?
Yeah, I don't remember why I ended up with V0 being the first one I went to, but it was, and I started playing around with it. I think maybe because some YouTuber told me that it was free, and I was like, all right, if I'm gonna try, like try for free. So I jumped on there and had a little, an idea that I just kind of wanted to see what it would look like. Didn't even know at that point that I should like go to an LLM, try to get a basic idea, like a structure. And so I literally just like typed out some stuff like, hey, this is what I want to do. And it put out something pretty rough. A lot of that has to do with me, not, I'm not crapping on V0 or anything, but it was interesting enough that I was like, okay, well, this was cool. What else is out there? So started doing some more research, looking around, and Bolt.new had just come out, and I was like, cool, like let's check that out. So uh started for free on that as well. Pretty quickly ran through my credits, but had a little bit better idea. I'd watched some more videos, kind of talked to you a tiny bit about it, and so I had a little more direction and knew where I wanted to go with it. Started playing around with that. Pretty quickly realized that all of my ideas were a little too big for it. And the reason I say that is because you can start off there and you can get a really good prototype of even a little web app, right? But once the project gets to a certain size, you start burning through tokens so fast. And so obviously your cost is going up. And then talking to you about it, I was just like, man, I wish I could just build one little part of it and then it could understand that that is a part of it and build the next part of it and whatever. And you're like, okay, well, you probably need to do something more like Windsurf. And so that's when I was like, okay, well, I'll start looking at Windsurf. Started getting into Windsurf and was instantly overwhelmed. But with your encouragement, I was just like, you know what, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep, I'm going to figure this out. And I did, and really glad I did because Windsurf is really, really good, really powerful. And it really kind of got me to the point where I realized that, okay, I can build these bigger things. It's just they all need to be in bite-sized chunks. And the other thing you taught me was I needed to figure out what the core feature was that I'm trying to build that first, and then kind of move on to other things because I was always like, let's make this UI incredible. And then I'd get to the core function of what I was trying to build and I couldn't do it. And so I'd spend all that time, tokens, everything trying to build out what I had in my mind and it looked cool, but I couldn't get it past that. So did that, and then just out of like kind of more of an experimental, decided I wanted to start trying to play with Cline, and it was a little bit of a learning curve because though Windsurf is a fork off of Visual Studio Pro, it's still set up different. Like they don't feel exactly the same. Got the hang of that, and now I just really enjoy Cline. I've gone back and played with like Lovable because I've heard good things about Lovable. Played with Replit just to kind of like see what's out there, what these things can do, and yeah, so that's been kind of my journey. Is I've played with almost everything. I haven't gotten into Cursor because Cursor you need to control it a lot more, and because I'm still new to this game, it's a little harder for me to do that. So I like something that I can, vibe code my way through, although I'm probably a little bit past vibe coding now. I'm probably more in like AI assisted development at this point. So that's kind of been my journey with your help along the way.
So a couple things I want to add or clarify based on some of those answers. It's not that Bolt couldn't accomplish what you wanted to do. It's that Bolt was getting incredibly expensive for the size of application you wanted to build. And that's one of the primary motivators to moving to a local. And when I told you to move off, my only experience was a Cursor. And Cursor, I've never spent more than $20 per month. Unless I'm using their premium model, which is, I think, the 3.7 thinking model, which is pay per use. But I rarely need to use that or rarely use it. So I normally pay $20 a month. So when you were telling me you were spending hundreds of dollars on Bolt, meanwhile, I'm spending $20 with much bigger code bases, I'm thinking there's something wrong with that. So that's why I encouraged you to move off, because I knew that was unsustainable from a cost perspective, especially because you weren't like building a simple landing page. You wanted to build a fairly decent sized application. You wanted to try different ideas. So you were going to be spending 8 hours a day, vibe coding on things. So that was going to become unsustainable really quick. The other thing you mentioned was that Cursor, part of what makes Cursor inexpensive is that they do a lot less with context. And a good way to think about it is context equals cost, right? The more context you have, the more cost, because there's more tokens that have to be processed, sent to the LLM as inputs. So Windsurf and Cline do a really good job of, by default, kind of adding more context so that you as a developer don't have to, worry as much about what the context should be. Whereas Cursor doesn't assume any context necessarily. When you're in Composer, the only thing is kind of looking at it is the context of the Composer window. But if you want to add context, you kind of have to tell it. It's like, oh, put this page in context, put this document in context. And there is Cursor rules, so you can have more global context. But you're more in charge of the context. And if you're a developer, you don't need to know everything about the application. You just need to know this very little piece of context. And then you also need to know the global rules. And that's all you need to know. So that means that there's very little context being passed, which means the cost isn't crazy. Again, a mental model, context equals cost. And once you understand that, you'll kind of understand why sometimes Cline can be very expensive, because it is putting more context. Also, if you're following their workflow, what they call their memory bank, that every time it starts a new task, reads the entire context, reads all the markdown files for like tech requirements and system requirements and UI requirements, if you've done that. And that's a lot of context. And then it has to send your prompt and the code, and because it's managing that workflow, there's a lot of tokens being burnt just in like managing the workflow from the agent. So that's why that one is very expensive, or could be expensive, but it's also much easier as a vibe coder to work with, because you don't have to know as much. You're just kind of speaking to it, and it's doing a lot for you and walking you through it. There's always a balance there, right? So with Cursor, you have to do more, you pay less. With Cline and Windsurf, you do less but have to pay more. So what's the trade-off you're willing to take? So if you're new, Windsurf is probably a better environment. Cline is probably the better environment because you need more handholding. Cursor, for professional developers, probably is a better environment because they don't need as much handholding, and pricing is going to be better. Now, if you're a developer that you just want to do a lot more for you if you just want to vibe code, I personally go to Cline if I want to vibe code, because sometimes I just want to give it a couple prompts and then have it run without me telling it much, and then add a feature, add a task. And I don't want to have to explain things. I want it to do most of it for me. So in those cases, I'm willing to pay for it to do it for me. But in other cases, I'm just in Cursor because that's not what I'm looking for. So, okay. So let's talk through each one of these. So V0, who is V0 for? I would say that V04 is for people who are just brand new getting into this. One of the reasons why I think, Tim, you have managed to go from Cursor to Bolt to Windsurf to Cline is because you started with something that was simple. If your first experiences with something like Cursor, you're going to be done in 2-3 days. You're going to be like, I don't understand what's going on. There's too many instructions. Like, this is not for me, right? I think V0 is a good place to start because it shows you the magic. You just give it a prompt and all of a sudden you have a UI in the browser. You don't have to learn anything. You don't have to install anything. So it's great for that. Now, V0 is built by a company called Versatile. Now, Versatile, they build the Versatile platform, which is what hosts, probably a good percentage of the internet. They are also the makers of Next.js, which is one of the most popular React frameworks. And their founder has been very active in the open source community. It's a great company, but I don't know that V0 is going to be their bread and butter because they have Next.js, they have their Vercel platform, and they've got this AI SDK that they support now. So they're doing a ton of open source. V0 was a cool project. I don't think that's their primary business, so I think that's going to continue to fall behind now that there's so much more competition. I think they were the first ones to show the whole prompt to UI, to a working UI, deploy sort of workflow. After them, I think came Anthropic. Now, Cursor's been around for a while, but that's a bit of a different thing. Well, what I'm talking about here is that where you prompt and all of a sudden you have something in your browser immediately as a non-developer. That's magical.
I think you're dead on that. It really is kind of like what gets you hooked because you get that instant gratification of you tell it to do something and it's there, as opposed to these other ones where you have to deploy it or, host it on your local server or whatever in order to see those things. That is the magic, is that it's just right there in front of you.
Yeah. In the early days, they just had the ability to just create one page, right? But now you can say, hey, create a new project. And you can say, add this page, add this feature, and then you can deploy that to Vercel. And they support, multiple web frameworks. They support, obviously Next.js, but they also support Vue and Svelte. So reasonably flexible for being what's considered a fairly simple tool. Now we're going to go through these in order of what I think are the easiest to use to maybe the most complex or biggest learning curve. And that's a cloud environment again. So all the cloud environments fall first, and then we have the local development because they're really professional tools. After that, we have Lovable. Now, Lovable used to be GPT Engineer. They actually were another one that they got a ton of early buzz with GPT Engineer. But when they rebranded the Lovable, it really started to take off. Now, Lovable, very easy to use, very easy to get started, fairly limited in what it could do. It's really going to be great for landing pages, and it's going to be good for fairly simple web applications. They do everything by default in React. So if you did want to do like Svelte or Vue, you can't use them. You could do it with V0. You could do it with Bolt and any of the other ones, but Lovable is a little more limited in that, where they kind of keep you in that ecosystem. They're choosing for you what technology you could use. But I also think that they've done some work behind the scenes. I can't confirm this, but I almost feel like they fine-tuned their model a little bit because they do tend to create some really nice landing pages relative to some of the others. So if you're like a web designer or you just want to get a landing page for your company and you're not looking to do anything super complicated, I think Lovable is a great solution for you. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I agree. Lovable is probably the one I have the least time on, but like you said, I feel like landing pages, it does a really good job. I feel like almost all of these are tuned a little bit behind the scenes because each one, you can give each one the exact same prompt and you're going to get very different results each time. And I know like the model that they're using and stuff like that is going to play into that as well, but I feel like they all kind of tune them a little bit to whatever their customer base is looking for.
Yeah, but I think Lovable is probably doing something even more extensive because I think when you can compress the problem that small to say, hey, we're only supporting web, we're only supporting React, you can probably fine tune that model even further.
Yeah.
So, but I think Lovable may be doing something because you can't choose the LLM with Lovable. And Lovable has a beautiful UI. You can't get lost in it. You're not going to go into Lovable and feel lost. So, nice product, but I think it's for the web designer. It's for the person that just needs some landing pages, maybe a simple prototype, but nothing too complicated, in my opinion. Then we move on to Bolt. And Bolt is the one that, Tim, you have a love-hate relationship with, so I'm going to let you take on who you think Bolt is for.
I really still think it's for those beginners that are just kind of starting to vibe code. I learned a ton from using Bolt, kind of how LLMs work, how to prompt it to get what I want, I kind of learned almost some structure things too, because I would like tell it to change something and it was not what I wanted, and then I'd have to be like, okay, tell me what this element is, and it would, and so I still feel like it's a great tool for like learning, and it is really powerful because I mean you saw some of the projects I did on there. For somebody with zero experience, really, it was pretty amazing what it put out. There is some flexibility there where you can tell it how you want it to build things. And I think one of the nice things about it, and one of the things I missed when I got off of it was how easy it was to deploy, how easy it was to hook to Supabase, how easy, all of those things are just really baked into it. And so when I kind of went out on my own on these other things, it was like, wow, it's crazy how good they are at that and how natural it feels. And you wouldn't know it was that complex of a thing. And again, it's not a super complex thing, but I was amazed at how complex it was compared to the experience I had on Bolt. So I still think it's a powerful thing, but my thing comes back to the cost. It's just it's if you want to do a larger project on it, it even tells you, and that I think that's what started the process of me getting off of it. It was like this project is large and will use more tokens or whatever. It gave me like a little warning, and I was like, yeah, you're right. I went back and looked at my token usage, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm flying through tokens now. So kudos to them for giving you that little warning, and not letting you get surprised. I do wish they would put a token counter thing somewhere on the page that you're working on, because having to like go back to the pricing all the time and look at where you're at is annoying. But that's for another topic, I guess. But yeah, that was my experience with it. I still love it, and I still think it's super cool, and I still think it has a place. I still have my subscription, even though I'm not really using it much. But every once in a while, I'll just jump on there and like, if I want to get an idea for a landing page that I fully want to build out, or I'll even start there, and then I'll download, and then I'll throw it into Windsurf and go from there. So, sometimes it's just, I guess, nostalgia. I don't know. I don't know why I keep it. I should probably get rid of it.
So Bolt's actually a really nice tool. A little background on Bolt. They're actually a company called StackBlitz, and StackBlitz is known for two things. Previously, first of all, they were started in 2017, and they built this web-based IDE. So the ability to sort of create and run apps from the browser. They did that. That was kind of their first product. Then in 2001, they created something called Web Containers, which was a WASM-based, WebAssembly-based sort of sandbox for you to deploy Node applications. And for people who aren't coders, a lot of these applications are using Node behind the scenes, especially if you have like APIs or anything like that that's talking to the database, you're going to be using more than likely a Node backend. And that way, when you launch a new application, that's all happening locally in your web browser, right? Whereas normally you have a virtual machine that you spin up somewhere in some data center, and there's latency there going back and forth, and there's cost going back and forth. And they were able to push that all onto the browser, which has a couple impacts. One is that it's going to be very fast. So I don't know if you've noticed this, Tim. Now you think about it, like, it was really fast versus like, maybe Versatile or Lovable is a bit slower. Replit's definitely slower. So that's one thing. The downside is you are maybe taking up resources on your browser. So I don't know if you notice any slowdown on your browser overall, where you're like, damn, Chrome's taking up a lot of memory. Anyway, it's a cool way for them to approach it. I think if you said, hey, I just have one project. I'm not a coder. I don't want to do anything complex. I think Bolt's a good choice in that scenario, where you just say, hey, I want to build a web application for my company. I know what it is. I'm not experimenting with 10 ideas. I just want that thing. I think Bolt's a good choice in that case. Right. So then we move on to Replit. So Replit's been probably a grandfather in this world. They've been around for a long time. Well, first of all, Bolt, Lovable, V0, I would consider those to be more single-purpose environments. I want to build a web application, or I want to build a website. They're more constrained in what they can do. Whereas Replit feels more like a general-purpose IDE in the web, right? Because from all the cloud-based ones, Replit is the only one that will do Python, will do Go, will do even C++. So if you want to be a programmer that does things outside of web, and I don't mean mobile. Mobile development is a whole different beast. That you kind of almost have to do local development for. But I mean, if you want to run a Python server, right? Because AI is all about Python. Python is the first class citizen when it comes to AI. So a lot of the libraries that are out there are Python first. Then they add JavaScript or TypeScript. So they support Python. So if you want to write your backend in Python, you could do that with Replit. You can't do that with Lovable or with Bolt or with V0. So that's one advantage. You could do, it's more of a general purpose IDE. And I think part of their mission statement is to say, look, we're here for people who don't even have Macs and Windows. They just have a Chromebook. Because if you have Replit, you basically can be a full-on developer, write code in any language, write any type of, application except, mobile native applications, and do it all within a browser window. That's pretty cool. So yeah, so Replit I think is good if you want to just do general program. If you want to go outside the bounds of web and React and you say, I want to do some Python, I want to do some Go, and you don't have a Mac, I think Replit's a great sort of middle ground.
Quick little side note here is I think the founder of Replit, created this because I can't remember what country he was in, but he had to go to cafes to use computers, and you had to like set up your whole environment and do all this stuff in order for him to be able to try to learn code and do all this stuff. And so he was uh, that was one of his like main reasons why he decided that he wanted to kind of start this project and believe in it so hard, was because uh, he wanted an environment where somebody with a Chromebook or somebody without all of the owning their own equipment could get in and learn and do things. So anyway, little side note there.
Yep. And there's a lot of people in that scenario that they don't have access to great computers and great internet. Yeah, it is pretty amazing that your stuff's in the cloud. You can go to any computer, you go to grandma's house, and then just open up a browser, and all of a sudden you have your whole IDE right there. That's a pretty cool use case. All right, so those are the cloud-based environments. Again, most of the cloud-based environments have built-in integrations to other tools, especially to databases. Supabase is kind of the big one, but like Versatile also, or Visa also integrates with Neon, which is another database provider. And then Netlify and Versatile are the two common hosting providers that they'll push to. Lovable does deploy to Fly.io, which is another one, just not as big, but also a nice provider. Once we get to the local-based ones, now the integrations are kind of now on your hand, right? There's not really built-in integrations to the environments, again, because the expectation is, as a developer, you should know this stuff. Now, there are extensions, so you can install extensions into Visual Studio that will do some of this stuff. But there's just more options once you're in the local environment. In the cloud environment, you're kind of constrained to what they give you, right? So if they don't give it to you, then you might not be able to do it, or you're building it yourself through APIs or whatever. When you're local, you could do whatever you want, right? That's where you have ultimate freedom and ultimate power. When it comes to local, I think the one that's made the biggest waves and had the biggest impact is Cursor. It's the most well-known. It's the most well-funded. It's probably the most technical, right? Because I think for them, I think the motivations of all these are a little bit different, right? Cursor, I think, is able to achieve this $20 per month pricing because they've done so much innovation on a bunch of things, right? They do a lot of things behind the scenes. It's a great tool. I do put this on the extreme side of probably the most complicated, not because the tool is complicated itself, but because it does the least amount for you. Part of that is context, right? You have to be in control of the context. If you're a professional developer, Cursor's great. But the context is a little more difficult to work with if you always want all context, which is going to cost you a ton of money. Cline and Windsurf are doing a lot more for you. Now, what Cline is, it's an IDE that is open source, right? So their business model is very different. If you put your own API keys, guess how much money they're making, Tim?
A whopping goose egg.
Yep, exactly zero. So they're incentivized to somehow get you to use them as the router. Because if you use them as the router, then they're just kind of the pass-through. You say, oh, I want to use OpenAI, or I want to use Anthropic, and what they're doing is using their key to call the LLM, and then they're charging you. Either they're charging you a little bit for premium, or they have a discount because they're big users, or maybe or maybe a little bit of both. I'm not sure, but yeah, if you want to support Cline, I would say buy credits to them so that they get paid. I didn't know this in the beginning, so I had my Anthropic key ready, so I just threw it in there, and I didn't really have a need to change outside of Gemini when I want to use free. Right now, during the time it's free. They do something that is I really love, and I wish they all did this. But when you when you start a task, they call them tasks, which again is a unique thing to Cline. When you do a task, every step in the task, they're telling you, this is how many input tokens, how many output tokens, how many cache tokens, and the price. And so they're giving you the sort of the request price or each step in the agent's process, and then they're rolling that up into the aggregate price of the task, which is incredibly cool for transparency and understanding like, oh man, I'm eating a lot of tokens. As a user, it helps you really understand what's going on behind the scenes. Sure doesn't do that. I don't think Windsurf does that, Tim.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope.
So that's a really cool Cline feature. And again, Cline, Windsurf, Cursor, they all have origins in Visual Studio, right? They're all Visual Studio based. Cline is an extension into Visual Studio, and Cursor and Windsurf are forks. So over time, Windsurf and Cursor may start to look a little bit different, but their lineage is still to VS Code. So they're all going to look and behave somewhat the same in terms of the editor and some of the options and adding extensions and things like that. Where they're really different is some of those little things that they're doing and adding, like task-based things and the ask versus plan tab, or in Windsurf it's the chat versus code, I think is what they call it, and then in Cursor has something similar as well. So they all are just taking slightly different UI approaches to how to do this. But one thing Windsurf does, they're introducing a lot of language, which I don't love. So they introduce Cascade as a concept, and every time they release things, they call it a wave. So they just released Wave 5, for example. So if you're new to this, all this additional language, now I have to learn like, well, what is a wave? Is that a thing? Like, do I got to learn what a wave is? Do I got to learn what a cascade is? And I think it's unnecessary. I think they're trying to be unique and brandable, but I think that takes away from I think people's ability to understand what this tool is doing. I think that's going to hurt them in the long term. Did you experience any of that, Tim?
Um, no, not really, honestly, because I think that was the first Visual VS Code thing that I got on. It that always felt like home, and then these other things have been the learning for me. But yeah, I don't even think I realized that the like when I was using it a ton that that was weird that it's called Cascade, and that it was weird that, each one had its own way of doing things. They all kind of feel similar, so it's I feel like once you get into all of them, you kind of understand it. But yeah, if I had started on VS Code or then tried to move over to Windsurf, I'm sure there would have been some like confusion on why they call things what they call things. But yeah, I guess because I started there, it kind of felt natural.
So these three, again, I think take your choice. I would say if cost is your biggest concern, I think Cursor is the way to go, particularly if you are a bit technical. If you're not super technical, then maybe Windsurf or Cline are the way to go. Again, Cline can get very expensive if you use it in the way that kind of its default model, right? This agentic model where it's really good at keeping context and it wants to talk to you a bunch and check with you on things. Burns a lot of tokens. So be careful with that one. Now, I think right now is a great time to use it and experiment with it because you can use Gemini Pro with Cline for free. As of this taping, which is April 2nd of 2025, Gemini 2.5 Pro is free. If you hit rate limits, it's important to make sure that you've added billing information to your account. Because if you add billing information, your rate limit will be 50 per minute, which should be good enough for anybody because the agent won't move that fast. If you don't have billing information, you're gonna get rate limited at I think like 2 requests per minute, which is not gonna work in Cline. So use Cline while you can, while it's free with Gemini. Try it with Sonnet, right? And you'll see how awesome it is, but it will get very expensive. You'll have to get a second job. I'm
Yeah,
just telling you right now.
yeah. You know what I've started doing is if I want it to run a little bit slower, not that I ever want it to run slower, but if I'm doing something in Windsurf at the same time, I'll throw it on DeepSeek V3 because it does a pretty good job of coding. It's just super slow, but it's pennies on the dollar to what Claude 3.7 charges. So if I'm not in a super rush to like see my progress that I'm trying to make, and I've got another project open, I found that's kind of a little bit of a hack. It's not as good as 3.7, but it's pretty good. And I know you've had success with Gemini. I haven't so far. So I prefer DeepSeek V3 before Gemini right now, at least.
Yeah, I think the difference in our success levels has been that I'm probably prompting it a little bit better and I'm being more specific on exactly what to do and how to do it. Whereas you're just saying, solve this problem for me. So that could be the difference, right? Because these systems are, they're non-deterministic. So even if I gave it the same request 3 times, it's going to have 3 different results. So that's why it's difficult sometimes to do side-by-side testing. Because I guarantee you, if you said, I'm going to put Cline, Windsurf, Lovable, Bull, and I'm going to build this ticket tracking system, and you fed it with the same prompt, you'd be like, oh, this one was better and it didn't run into any bugs, and this one, oh, it was horrible and it hit this issue. And then you repeat that same thing, and you might have a completely different outcome, right? So it's really hard to do test of one. You got to really do it dozens of times, and unfortunately, who has time or the money to run side-by-side comparisons dozens of times, right?
Yeah.
Also, one LLM or one tool may do better with a style of prompt versus another one, So it's really hard to compare, to be honest with you. But at the end of the day, they're all kind of using the same LLM. What they have different is the system prompts and a lot of the tooling inside. So oftentimes it's you're the problem, not the tool. And I don't mean you specifically, Tim.
No,
I just mean that the person prompting is often the problem. Or they're asking for something and they're not being specific enough.
One other thing that we didn't mention in Cline is, especially for, again, somebody new like me, how easy it is to get the MCP servers that you want.
Oh, yeah.
They have a marketplace, and you can just go on there, click which ones you're looking at. They even have reviews. I mean, it's really good. Everyone needs to adopt that, because with MCPs, becoming the standard now, I feel like everyone just needs to adopt that type of ease of getting these things into your IDE.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, they made an announcement today about a release they just did today on improving their UI for remote MCPs. So that's cool. They're continuing to, because MCPs are a bit of a complex topic for those uninitiated. But yeah, kudos to them for continuing to improve on that. That is a differentiator between the different IDEs is how they handle MCP and how much they hold your hand in doing that process. But so much more power is coming to the IDEs because of MCP. If you need those tools during the development process, so they kind of start to feel like a bolt, where it's like, I don't have a database integration, but I can connect to Superbase. It is very scary. I know this is not the talk for it, but I connected MCP to a remote database, and I said, hey, I need to change this enumeration, and it wrote the script. It's like, great, do you want me to run it? And I looked at it, I'm like, wait a minute, why are you dropping my table? It's like, you should be doing a migration. And it's like, oh yeah, you're right. So again, if you don't know what you're doing, this is very dangerous, because it doesn't know any better. And so in that case, I had data, and they would have dropped the data and recreated the table, when in fact what it should have done is gone through a strategy to migrate the data in some way, right? Ways, depending on what you're doing, there's a lot of ways to do it, but it's not as easy as just making the change directly, because you could be corrupting data or deleting data.
Yeah, early on when I was coming over to Windsurf, it was almost my goal to, with MCP servers, turn it into Bolt. I really wanted all of those things to work really, seamlessly, and I just loved that feel that I got from Bolt. You warned me. You were like, be careful. There's you don't want to give it too much control, and I was like, he's just being extra cautious, whatever. I was like, YOLO, just MCP server, just trying to get it to be as close to Bolt as I could. And then I built out. I mean, it took me hours to build out this database of information, and I did a lot of it manually. And yeah, I finally got the Supabase MCP server working with Windsurf. And so I was like, I just told, the LLM to do something, and it just destroyed my whole database that I had spent all that time working on. And I was like, all right, I guess he knew what he was talking about. But yeah, in my in my goal to reach Bolt as, in Windsurf, I got a little bit overly excited.
All right, so to recap, Cline, Cursor, Windsurf, I think they're going to be the right tool to use. If you're a professional developer, 100%, you should be using one of these tools. If you feel like you've gone beyond the point of, I just want to build one thing, if you want to build one thing or more focused, you're not using it too much, I think Bolt's a great tool, Replit's also a good tool, although maybe again a little more general purpose for unless you're trying to do a lot of different things, especially with Python. However, if you're trying to do more of it, I think you're going to have to go to an IDE purely from a cost perspective, but also because you're going to want that additional power that comes from being able to, have a local environment and control everything about what you're doing. And there's going to be a learning curve. That's why I think jumping straight to the IDEs, if you're not a developer, might be a too big of a hurdle unless you have someone in your network that's willing to help you when you get stuck. So having a good mentor or just being part of a community that you can learn from is useful. Maybe you can make that jump, but otherwise I would start and kind of go to that continuum. Like start, V0, understand this, maybe Lovable, Bolt, Replit if you want to play with Python or some other things, or maybe just explore what's out there. And then from there you jump into the true IDEs. And I do think if you're, again, not a developer, you go with Windsurf or Cline. And if cost becomes an issue and you feel like you know what you're doing now, maybe give Cursor a try.
And one last final little thing here is almost all of these tools have a free, plan that you can get started on. And I would suggest just trying them all, just get in there, play around with at least the free model, and then you can kind of decide which one you like out of Lovable, Replit, all of those ones. And like you said, then you can take that stepping stone and move on to the IDEs. But I just want to throw it out there that almost all of these have, in fact, I think all of them have a free plan. Get in there, play around, try it, and then kind of figure out which one you like the best and what works best for what you're doing.
Cool. So yeah, and then as far as what we're using, Tim, Windsurf, and Cline, me, Cursor, and Cline. And yeah, that's kind of where we're at today. I bet you in a month we'll maybe have a different direction, but that's our setup today. All right. Well, hope you guys enjoyed this. If you have any questions on any of these editors, let us know.
Yeah, drop us a like or a subscribe if you can.
All right. See you guys.